Anyone who's spent the night in the tent with a mosquito can attest to the impact that a small organism can have on a much larger one. That's the analogy that Forest Service Associate Deputy Chief State and Private Forestry Vicki Christensen used in referring to the relationship between the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities and the USDA Forest Service. The partnership between the grandfather of federal natural resources agencies and a small nonprofit that has existed for less than a decade is truly achieving shared goals. At the Endowment, we sum up what we're about in two short phrases: keeping working forests as forests and advancing family wage jobs in rural forest communities. In a just-released report that highlights the reach of the partnership between our two organizations, we look at what we're doing together to advance both the Endowment's goals and 3 of 4 of the agency's strategic priorities. In a time of burgeoning challenges on one hand and declining human and financial resources on the other, it's more important than ever that you and we build effective partnerships. To put those challenges in perspective, we've invited the first Chief of the Forest Service to join us as we highlight the breadth, depth, and results of some of our efforts to date. We appreciate you joining us today.
Delighted to be here.
As a former 2-time governor of Pennsylvania and the first Chief of the Forest Service, how do you prefer to be addressed?
Well, as a forester, and regarding what I consider my most important legacy, they called me Chief then, so I guess you can call me Chief now.
Chief, we couldn't agree more with that important legacy that you left for the American people. In your day, what were the top 2 or 3 most important challenges that you and your peers faced?
Well, there were many. First, I'd say getting Congress to go along with President Roosevelt to reassign a large portion of the public domain to national forests, and then getting the people to go along, especially those exploiting it. Managing the lands for future generations. We could not continue to take without putting something back. And forest fires raged unchecked. We had to reduce the losses.
My generation could never thank you and President Roosevelt enough for the legacy that you left that covers over 200 million acres today. You know, I'm amazed that over 100 years later, some of the challenges you faced during your day are exactly the same challenges that we face in modern America. In your day, the challenge was to avoid exploitation and set about a scientific management base for those forests. Today, the pendulum has swung even more wildly to those that question whether we should manage the forest at all, or just simply let nature take its course. And sadly, while for many decades we did a great job of controlling wildfire losses, over the last 3 decades, with each decade, losses have doubled. But in our case, those fires today are driven by things that weren't even on the radar in your time. First, heavy buildup of materials from lack of management for a number of decades, and a changing climate that served to exacerbate drought and extend the fire season on the other.
Those were indeed challenges that we didn't have in my day.
Chief Pinchot, as we only have a few moments together, I wonder if you'd help me walk through some of the things that our small nonprofit and the U.S. Forest Service are doing together to address many of those challenges that we just discussed.
Well, I'd be honored, but I can tell you in my day, the idea of a non-for-profit entity working with a federal agency was something not even imagined. I'm looking forward to seeing what's afoot.
Well, let's start first with just a high-level summary of the range of works, and then maybe go back and look at one example within each category.
Sounds good.
Let's array the initiatives in what Chief Tom Tidwell calls the agency's top priorities.
You know, I'd like to meet this Chief Tidwell. I've heard many good things about him.
Let's start first with what we're doing to sustain forest. We're looking at the potential of modern genetic science as a response to exotic pests and diseases. Secondly, we're exploring the potential of 21st century products from woody cellulose at the nanoscale. Thirdly, we're considering the potential of a World War II technology, torrefaction, essentially roasting wood, to provide a market outlet for low-value wood while meeting green energy needs. Fourth, we're looking at how we can conserve working forests in the face of explosive development in the southern United States. Fifth, we're creating the first ever database and online mapping tool for conservation easements across the nation. And finally, we're working to enhance collaboration between state forest and state wildlife agencies.
I feel like I've awakened from a long sleep. These terms you use, like nanotechnology. Please elaborate on that if you could.
We'll do that, Chief. In the delivering benefits to the public strategy, we're about 4 things. First, doing what we can to link drinking water and water management authorities with forest conservation. Secondly, we're just beginning to explore the potential of forests to help the Gulf of Mexico recover from a tragic oil spill. We're working with African American families who own forests to engage them in advocacy for forest ownership and management and use of those forests as an economic stepladder. And finally, we're looking at ways to deploy modern wood to energy to advance America's local energy needs.
Well, I think I followed that part. At least I don't feel like an alien.
Chief Pinchot, you're surely no alien, but things are getting more complex and challenging as time passes by. Finally, we're working to help people understand the place of wood to energy in forest health and management, and facilitating cross-border collaboration between Canada and the U.S. to address forest health challenges. And finally, we're attempting to identify pathways forward for our heavily embattled forest products industry.
That's quite intriguing. Those initiatives seem very important, especially to advance the overlapping objectives of the Endowment and the Forest Service. I wonder if you might elaborate on 3 topics.
Chief, we're happy to go in any direction you'd like.
Okay, I'd like a bit more explanation on the genetics, and also about the work you're doing with African American families and their forests. And finally, what you hope to accomplish with working with the Canadians.
All right, let's give it a go. If we hope to sustain forests for the future, we must address the tsunami of exotic pests and diseases that are threatening forest health and the loss of entire species of trees. In your day, the redwood of the East, the American chestnut, was just beginning to suffer attack from the exotic chestnut blight. 100 years later, that species that once dominated forests of the East is essentially gone, except for stump sprouts that appear only to be repeatedly killed back by the ever-present blight. Forest scientists have been working for almost half a century in greenhouses to produce a blight-resistant American chestnut by breeding it with its mostly resistant Chinese cousin. While that work's shown great promise, with new pests showing up almost monthly, we don't have the luxury of time and the funds to respond in those types of ways. The Endowment's Board of Directors, using our mantra to do what others can't or won't, made a $2 million challenge to study the potential of modern biotechnology in the laboratory as a means that could hold potential to addressing forest health in the future. We're pleased to report that not only did the Forest Service accept that challenge, but also one of the nation's large utilities, Duke Energy, joined us in addressing the American chestnut. We began with a convening of scientists and encouraged them to look at ways to accomplish production of a plantable, disease-resistant tree in 3 years. Their first plan would have taken 20 years. They went back, reworked it, got it down to 12, and we continued to challenge them to get it down to 3. To their own surprise and credit, they did it.
I'm astounded that after more than 100 years, we still don't have the American chestnut growing in our forests again. But more troubling is that you seem to have non-scientific challenges that can't be solved with scientific tools.
Chief, you hit it right on the head. We went into this challenge with the expectation that we could address the science component of the challenge, but understood that public acceptance and the regulatory hurdles would be the tougher ones to address. That's why we worked so hard to enlist some of the nation's leading conservation partners, the Nature Conservancy, the Environmental Defense Fund, and to bring the 3 federal regulatory agencies to the table that regulate genetic materials and plants. Our hope and common concern was that if we worked together, we could address the loss of trees using these modern tools. We've made enormous progress, but we have miles to go. Clearly, the Forest Health Initiative, co-funded by the Endowment and the Forest Service, is forging the way.
Well, I wish you and your colleagues great success. I can't wait for more updates.
Chief, let's turn to the strategy that deals with benefits to the public and the work we're doing with African American landowners.
I'm all ears.
After the Civil War and through a range of programs that followed, freed slaves were given access to about 19 million acres of land, much of it forested. Due to continued discrimination and inequitable access to the legal system, the lion's share of those lands have been lost, resulting in billions of dollars of lost assets. Today, approximately 3 million acres remain in the hands of black families. Sadly, much of that land lacks clear title and thus prevents the owners from accessing federal and state assistance programs. Our board approved a 3-state pilot to study if we could uncover ways to turn those lands into productive assets and engage their owners as advocates for active forest management. We pledged $1 million to support pilots in Alabama, North Carolina, and South Carolina, and through an early commitment of the Forest Service, we were successful in gaining support from the Natural Resources Conservation Service as well. While we've come a long way, our pilot has proven that with trusted on-the-ground partners and alignment of nonprofit, federal, and state resources, we can make a difference. That endowment challenge and the Forest Service modest commitment has served to leverage more than $5.5 million in funding to see African American forest landowners turn what many considered a burden into a productive asset. And those owners are responding with both enthusiasm and action. Undersecretary of Natural Resources and Environment Robert Bonney calls the initiative among the department's most important and effective.
Well, I admit that in my day we gave little thought to the needs or roles of black families in forestry. I'm very happy to hear that good progress has been made.
We have a good start, but a long road ahead if we're to turn those early successes to institutional change. Okay, let's quickly turn to the final Forest Service strategic objective and our cross-border efforts and bring this review to a close. With the endowment's roots in the long-running trade dispute over softwood lumber between the U.S. and Canada, we take very seriously one sentence in the side letters that serve as our Organic Act. It states that everything the endowment does should ultimately benefit the North American forest industry. Even though we're a U.S.-based foundation that must deploy our funds in the States, we take very seriously that language and believe that you and others can review our portfolio of work to date and see those direct connections. None is more direct than our role as convener for what has become an ongoing series of bilateral summits between our two countries.
Well, I applaud you for taking a continental view of forest health and management. Even in my time, the idea of the boundaries between our two countries had nothing to do with the reality of fires, pests, and other forest management issues. To think otherwise was wrong-headed.
Exactly. While cooperation and collaboration has been going on between individual scientists for decades, we're finding that if we take a strategic approach, we can stretch limited human and financial resources and respond more effectively to those common challenges. Perhaps the importance of the endowment's role was best stated by the head of the Canadian Forest Service in a recent message. Again, like all we do, though, we've just begun to scratch the surface of the potential. Chief Pinchot, there's a lot more that we could review, but I think it's time that we bring this overview to a close. For those who wish to dig a bit deeper, we have a companion report, Mosquito in the Tent, that's available online at this address. In less than a decade, the U.S. Forest Service has committed $13 million in partnership funding to the endowment, which we've matched with almost $25 million in our own funds, and added another $12 million in partner cash, and further leverage for an impact of more than $105 million.
I must say, you're giving it the good fight. That a lean organization like the endowment has accomplished so much great work in such a short period is mightily impressive. Those of us who broke ground to create a legacy that today is far beyond our wildest dreams, we salute you, and all the fine men and women who make up the U.S. Forest Service team.
Chief, we can't thank you and your peers enough for your vision, tenacity, and commitment to the generations that followed. You set a high bar, and those of us that walk in those footsteps give you thanks. Likewise, we at the Endowment can't say enough good things about our colleagues at the Forest Service, both in turn for helping us get our feet on the ground and for the trust and partnerships that have emerged. Chief, again, we thank you so much for spending time with us as we explored our developing partnership with the USDA Forest Service.
It's my pleasure, Carlton. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you.